how durable is naturalization? Like, I mean, I think like up until maybe a couple of months ago, my sense was if you're a naturalized citizen, you're in. It's locked in. That's like you can't reverse that. But it sounds like the Trump administration feels like you can reverse that. So just walk us through from a legal perspective, like how durable is naturalization?
Yeah, and that was the impetus for the book, You Are Not American, published now in the midst of Trump 1, because I was watching the Trump administration declare that naturalized citizen status was at risk. And that was as shocking to me as it seems like it was to you. And I'm a professor of citizenship and immigration law. So I researched the history. That's what this book does in part. And it turns out we did have a history in the United States in the first half of the 20th century of taking away citizenship from naturalized citizens because of their political views. It was part of the Cold War era. Because of their race, there were people who were naturalized who were Arabic or who were South Asian, and the US Supreme Court and the executive branch said, wait, you weren't supposed to become a citizen. We weren't supposed to allow you to naturalize. We had racial limitations on naturalization in this country until the 1950s. So people lost their citizenship based on race, based on ideology. Women lost their citizenship, whether naturalized or born US citizens, if they married a non-citizen. So that was the first half of the 20th century. But then the Supreme Court did away with that in 1967. It said we should almost never denaturalize people, only for some kind of fraud or error in the naturalization process. No other reason is good enough. You can choose to leave the nation and leave your citizenship, but the government can't take it away from you. And then that brought us to the first Trump administration, where they very explicitly said, this isn't like my spin on it, this is what they said in memos, Jeff Sessions, Attorney General, among others, we're going to use denaturalization as a tool of immigration enforcement. And we're going to go after people, even if there's inadvertent error, as some were. And they tried to denaturalize people on a grand scale, a broad scale. They did start a number of investigations, but they failed to do it in any broad, mass, systematic way, in part because courts have to be involved, and that slows everyone down. But they're ramping up again. And of course, this is, again, part of the immigration crackdown is not just to send away immigrants, undocumented immigrants or illegal immigrants, but also to take away citizenship and deport people.
It's interesting that you mentioned that period too, just because there was that piece in Rolling Stone about Stephen Miller, and Trump had asked the question, "Who's my Roy Cohn?" Right? Miller, one, has for you say Jeff Sessions, he was a staffer under Sessions. Two, he has an obsession with the Immigration Act of 1924 and wants to return to the period of racial quotas, which was in part used to justify turning away boats of Jews fleeing the Holocaust during that time period. And that has been kind of, with him acting like the president, basically being the shadow president, that's been their policy goal, is to return to that period that you're talking about there.
Yeah, and the 1924 Immigration Act, as you just correctly said, was very much about racial quotas. That's what the enactors of that law said as they enacted it. In this country in these cyclical ways, and it's often based on race, but not entirely. And Irish immigrants came to the U.S. in the middle of the 19th century. They were vilified. They were racialized as the other. Italian immigrants were the same. Then, of course, we've moved on today to other groups from, South America, groups from Asia. But it's just worth noting, this has been something historically we've done, and we've had cyclical waves of xenophobia followed by embracing immigrants. Yes, this is part of Stephen Miller's plan. The fact that he's opposed to all immigration except white South Afrikaners, I think, tells you everything you need to know about him. And I will just add finally that I do think we need to take a hard look at immigration policy. I'm not a fan of open borders. I think we need to have limits. The question is what kind of limits, and that is really a question about what kind of nation we are. And the final point there I'll say is immigrants power our economy and our nation, and that has never been so obvious as now. And I predict in a couple of decades, we're going to be competing with other nations for immigrants. And if we could be losing that race right now. Canada, for example, is building on our immigration system to try to entice people who've been approved for visas here, H-1B visas in the US, to come to Canada. And many are taking that offer.
Oh, I mean, the number of foreign students is down. I think we're going to be desperate in the event that we're in a position to articulate it as a country. We're going to be desperate for immigration. I think a lot sooner than a decade or two. But there's two things I want to get to what you mean by open borders. But before we get there, is there anything that the Trump administration is doing in terms of immigration that is novel relative to what they attempted during their first administration? Because, I think there is a general sense like, oh, they're going much further this time. But is that the case, or are they just more competent and have planned this out with their time off? Like the idea that there were denaturalization during the first round of Trump administration, I think has been lost. And now we just see them doing it in a more methodical way. Is that what's happening, or is there something that's novel?
I wouldn't call them more competent. I might say more brazen. Look, the goal, and it was clear from the beginning, I was listening to Stephen Miller speak publicly before the election and in the run up to the taking office. And basically the goal is get the courts out of it or have the courts be yes men to the degree possible. Because what slows down this administration and Trump 1 in deporting non-citizens, and by the way, it wasn't successful. It didn't deport that many people in Trump 1 or stop people from coming across the border. And what they said the problem was courts and due process, the requirement that people have a hearing and opportunity to be heard before they can be removed. So that's their goal, to get rid of that. And are they more competent? I wouldn't say they're more competent. They're losing in court, but they are going to, lower courts cannot hold the line for that long, and Congress is not speaking up. So to the degree that they are attempting to deport people without due process, for example, by claiming we're being invaded by Venezuela under the Alien Enemies Act, not true. We're not under invasion. But to the degree they're making those kinds of claims, eventually they will prevail in getting people removed from the United States because lower courts, district court judges cannot hold the line for years.
How I asked you how I guess durable naturalized citizen. How durable is non-naturalized citizenship? Like, I mean, yours or mine. As I mean, I was born here. My parents were, American citizens. But is there a world in which they get to say, you know what, you've lost your citizenship?
Yeah, well, Rosie O'Donnell has some experience with this since Trump threatened to take away her citizenship. And she's a birthright citizen. So I'll say, first of all, that for those naturalized citizens who are listening, the Trump administration has tried to denaturalize people and investigate, but has yet to succeed. So I don't want people to live in fear. As for birthright citizens, that would be yet another, bridge even farther. I think it's not beyond this president to want to, for example, deport what he called homegrowns, by which he meant native U.S. citizens crimes or sentenced for crimes that he said he'd deport them. I think there's a risk, and I think this is a slippery slope. And of course, the birthright citizenship executive order purporting to limit who could be claiming a birthright citizenship is another example of how being born in the U.S. does not guarantee you safety. I'll be clear, I don't think we're there yet. I'm not living in fear as a native-born U.S. citizen, but I've got my eye on this because I think that's the goal: destabilize everyone's status.
Let's also just touch upon what limitations, when we say open borders, what do you, and you say you're not for open borders.
Yeah.
What does open borders mean in that context? And what limitations do you think should exist on immigration and why? And then I do want to cover a couple of these.
I was going to say in 30 seconds.
Eras.
I'll just say no one, that certainly no political, no president, Democrat or Republican, is for open borders or ever has been in any recent history.
But when we say open borders, do we just mean no borders?
Yeah.
Or I mean, like, what constitutes open borders? Is it do European countries have open borders with each other?
I think the most extreme version of open borders is what we have between our states, right? Between the state of Virginia and its neighbors, between European countries, although I don't think they're as open as they used to be or were trying to be when they formed the European Union. I don't show a passport when I cross state lines as an American living in the United States. That's what the most extreme version of open borders is. It works great, by the way, in the United States, between our states. But no, I don't think we should have that as a policy, and nor has it been the policy of any president, Democrat or Republican. And I just use that, I make that point to say having limits on immigration makes sense, and they're something we should discuss as a nation. That's not the same as taking away citizenship or deporting people who are here legally or who have a right at least to be heard before they're deported. And so those are the distinctions I'm drawing. You asked about what our immigration policy should be. That is a tough question, and I wish Congress would grapple with it. That's where, that's the body that should be considering this.
Oh, without a doubt.
Yeah.
I'm just curious in the sense of like when we talk about there should be limitations on immigration. I mean, I think one of the problems that we have right now is that there has been very little articulated about what an immigration policy would look like that is immigrant positive, if you will, which ostensibly a significant portion of the country, if not the majority, frankly, hold, but we don't see that being articulated by, as far as I can tell, the Democratic Party, the opposition party here. There is more of a, well, the Republicans are extreme, but there's no positive. So I'm just curious, when you say limitation, like what does that look like?
Yeah. So there's a couple different changes that if, I were immigration czar or a member of Congress who could start this conversation, I would say we should do. One is we have got to expand the number of visas available for those who want to work and have skills to work in the United States. Our number was set in 1990 at 140,000 employment visas. 1990 was before the internet, and our country, of course, has grown enormously since then, and our economy has changed. That is just an unrealistic number. We need more unskilled workers. Over half the people who harvest our crops are undocumented immigrants. We would starve without them. Our food prices would rise without them. We need more legal ways for those people to come. So that's where the conversation should start. We should have more employment-based visas. And I'll add, I'm really frustrated by the hypocrisy because the same people who oppose immigration, who refuse to allow expansion of these numbers, and the same politicians who do this also live in states with enormous numbers of undocumented immigrants being employed by Americans. 5% of the working population in Texas is undocumented. They're employed by U.S. citizens in Texas who are violating immigration laws, but those U.S. citizens never face the consequences. So they both bemoan undocumented immigration and benefit economically from undocumented immigrants. We should legalize those immigrants by providing work visas and letting them come legally. And the flip side is I think we need to fix our asylum system. We needed to move people through much faster, allow them in or not. Right now, asylum had become, or under Biden, a way for people to come and work. They were needed, they were benefiting our economy, but that's not the way to do it.
Well, you mentioned the business owners too, and the exploitative labor piece of this, and I think that doesn't get discussed enough. How someone's status with immigration can be used by a boss as leverage against that worker, and in part the lack of progress that we're talking about in Congress, I would argue is because of that, because this is like a sub labor, this is the folks that are most susceptible to wage theft. And you can have a boss say, you want to speak up a little bit about unsafe work conditions? Well, we can deport you. So my question then is do visas solve that problem? Or would citizenship and more blanket amnesty solve that problem? Like, say, if you're going to work if American companies want to hire people, well, they can't, or put some protections in place so that can't happen, for example.
Yeah, I think that protections in place so that doesn't happen. What you just described, there's lots of empirical evidence that is what happens. That is, employers look the other way, hire undocumented immigrants knowing they're undocumented, and then the minute the undocumented immigrant complains about dangerous workplace conditions or below minimum wage salary, then suddenly they report them to the immigration officials. So one way to stop that is to say, look, if an employee has been abused by an employer, then we're not going to, let the employer off the hook. They're going to have to pay the fines or suffer the costs, in some cases going to jail for the heads of companies that know this is happening. So that's a disincentive to violate immigration law if it were ever enforced. And then secondly, to give workers that speak up about unsafe work conditions protection from being deported if they're actually trying to protect the workplace. And I should add that when undocumented workers face unsafe work conditions, that means the US citizens working alongside them do too. And so if you don't have any sympathy for the immigrant, I hope you do. But if you don't, then have sympathy for the US citizen worker who faces similar dangers in that workplace. There's no perfect solution. There's no easy solution. I certainly don't have an easy solution, but we're not even trying to get to these solutions, certainly not in Congress. And that's what's frustrating.
I mean, I guess the last big push was during, presumably, I think, Biden offered something that never got taken up and ended up, frankly, both the supposedly sweetener in there ended up being the only thing that sort of, I think, survived that process, which is more often than not the case, that being, mass deportations or, assaults on or trying to keep people out. And I don't know if the Democrats will have learned it has same thing happened under Obama, that strategy doesn't seem to work as a political matter. Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.